I'm here to introduce the next speaker to the stage, and I'm going to take 18 minutes to do it. It's not that I was immediately drawn to this person. In fact, our connection is rather complicated, which isn't to say that it isn't meaningful. And in time, I hope you'll understand why. I want you to imagine that this was your stage, and you could choose anyone that you know to speak on it. Who would you choose? Who is your most interesting person? Now, I don't mean someone abstract like the Pope. No, I mean someone that's in your life today that you have a story that connects you. You exercise with them, or you work with them, or you play with them, or you make love with them. Now, if it's still the Pope, I am really looking forward to your talk. It's going to be awesome. But who is your most interesting person? I became interested in this question of interesting people's most interesting person 15 years ago already. Wow. I was on a road trip driving through the French Alps with my good friend, Suede Bergerman. I met Suede. He was my university music tutor when I was studying at Newcastle University in my early 20s. But we became such good friends that we took this road trip through the French Alps, and we were driving up this particularly steep alpine pass. And Suede explained to me how the topography of land that we were driving through was formed in geological time. And I turned on the radio, and no matter what song came on, Suede would know who recorded it, when it was recorded. And as the light started to fade, Suede taught me how you can identify species of tree just from their silhouette. You ever have that experience when you're in the company of someone that just seems wired differently to everybody else? Well, that's this guy. He's just able to absorb all this trivia and apply it to, day-to-day stuff, anything he wanted. And I figured, he must find most people boring, actually, or tedious, because he'd know when they were talking rubbish, even if they didn't know it themselves. But the one person he finds most interesting would be someone that is a human being I would really like to meet, because they were bound to be fascinating. And so I said, Suede, who's the most interesting person that you know? And he told me about his uncle, Sir Roger Grafe, the BAFTA Lifetime Award-winning documentary filmmaker, whose films have influenced the way that we think as a society about some pretty important stuff. He made a film about how prisoners are dealt with when they're taken into custody by the police. And he made another film about women who have been rape victims, how they are handled by the authority. And these films influence government policy on these issues, but more importantly almost, they influence the way that we think about these issues. Later, I met Roger, and I said, Roger, you know that Suede describes you as the most interesting person that he knows, your nephew. Whose would yours be? And he tells me about Angie Mason, the undercover journalist. And he introduces me to Angie, and Angie invites me to her home. But this time, I take along my cameras, and I start documenting this series of interconnected films where each person leads me to the most interesting person that they know. Later, I would go on to call this a trail. And I said, Angie, who's the most interesting person that you know? And she told me about this girl that she grew up next door to as a child, who grew up to become a single Jewish mother of mixed-race children living under challenging family circumstances. But she was also the greatest reggae promoter in the United Kingdom. She was the first to bring over Horace Andy, Rico Rodriguez, some staples of this really important scene within the UK. She became synonymous with this movement. And by this time, I was completely hooked. I was addicted in following this trail. Where would it take me next? Who would it lead to? And I managed to secure a little bit of arts and culture funding, and it became the way that I explored the world. And I went on to make more than 200 films using this method. And at that point, I start tweaking the format. See how it could be applied in different realms, in commercial realm, different themes and subjects. And that became a documentary film that premiered at the Sheffield Doc Fest, became an exhibition that was exhibited at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And last year I did a campaign with Philips exploring innovation and leadership, where each leader would lead me to the most innovative leader that they know. And in that way I went to Gurgaon, Singapore, Moscow, here in Germany to Birmingham, exploring leadership at all levels of hierarchy and various skill sets. And although it wasn't my intention when I began this project, there are some lessons that I learned that I'd like to share. The first thing is about this idea of one most interesting person. One has a value to your 3 or 5 merely interesting people. One most interesting person, and it becomes a gift, an honor that you can give to someone that you care about. And what I've noticed is that people take that challenge and see it as an opportunity. And they see that opportunity and they take it very seriously. And they use it in some interesting ways. Let's go back to my original question. If it was up to you to choose someone to speak on this stage, who would you choose? Have you got someone in your mind? If you do, why? Why did you choose that person? What motivated you? Was it because you wanted to give thanks back to someone that inspired you to be the person that you've become? Or was it perhaps that you wanted to encourage someone that you know would do amazing things with this stage if only they had the opportunity to stand on one and you could give them that opportunity? Or was it perhaps you used it as an investment so that it can bring you closer to someone that can help you realize your own ambitions? Whichever way you went, I've noticed that there is this interesting link between the environments that we live in, the values of the society around us, and the choices that we make. Now, if you do have someone in mind, I'd love to hear about it, and you can tweet using the hashtags behind me. Just a little soupçon about the person that you have in mind later when you get home. The second point is about friendship. I've rarely felt like just a journalist interviewing a stranger when I do this project. I more often feel like a friend that's being introduced to a friend. And what's lovely about that, and it's probably the most rewarding thing about this all, is that it creates this honest and open environment to have an authentic conversation. And I think people really appreciate that I'm not a typical journalist, because journalism and journalists are shrouded in distrust, particularly at the moment, I feel, in the way that stories are edited and stories are selected to suit a particular agenda. And I think there's a recognition, perhaps, that this project sidesteps that whole mechanism. And the third thing, and perhaps the most important thing for me, is that, okay, let's go back to our imaginary stage that we talked about before. You've nominated someone, and they've nominated the next person. We're 3 or 4 presenters down the line. What tends to happen is that someone will present that has an opposing perspective to an interest that you share with them. In other words, the project at that moment becomes a forum that can bridge connections between otherwise divided people. And there's any number of studies and numerous talks on stages just like this that show us that diversity can lead us to outcomes that we desire, whether it's decreasing economic divides or increasing productivity or spurring creativity. We know that mixing things up, whether it's in school or in business, can get us there. But what is a harder subject to grapple with is, how do we decide what goes in the mix? What policy do we invigorate that can help us nurture difference? Well, I think there's something in the idea of this trail idea and the forum it creates that can bring together not just the subjects we should be talking about, but the ambassadors that can represent them. In preparing for this TEDx talk, I thought it would be a pretty cool idea to do a TEDx trail. This is the TEDx trail. And what you can see immediately, just visually, is in just 5 people, this wonderful geographic spread. We traverse the earth. But what I hope to show when I play you a few extracts in a moment is that beneath the geography, there's also this quite lovely demographic and thematic diversity, which is also compelling. Now, sadly, I didn't actually go to all these places. I sent them a series of instructions, and I asked them to answer the instructions on an audio recording device, and then take a selfie, wherever they happen to have chosen to answer those questions. And I'll play you just a few extracts to give you a flavor, not the whole thing, so I haven't got time. But I hope that you can see some of the diversity of skill sets and etc. When I play that. So sit back and enjoy the whistle-stop tour of TEDx's Most Interesting Person Trail.
My name is Melanie Joy. I'm a psychologist, author, professor, and speaker. My goal is really to help people to make their food choices more freely. The most interesting person I know is Zoe Weil. The work that she's doing is not only cutting edge, but it's transformational in a really holistic way.
The place where I'm recording this is the shores of the Institute for Humane Education overlooking the mountains of Acadia National Park. The path I've taken is to try to change the educational system. So many forces within it work against young people really becoming the kind of critical and creative thinkers that the world needs. Tawanda could dance and could teach many different styles. And on top of all that, at 23 years old, Tawanda also ran a nonprofit organization for orphans who had HIV and AIDS in Zimbabwe.
My name is Tawanda Chabikwa. Many of us are walking parallel journeys that may or may not sync up in terms of field or interest or practice and vocation, but there's a resonance. And I met her in Hong Kong in school. Some mystery about how she goes about things.
I want to stop there just for a second, because Tawanda nominates a person that takes the trail in a direction that, if I'm honest, I felt uncomfortable with.
Hi, my name is Noam Rabinovich. I'm at home right now in Israel, my parents' home to be precise. I don't even know if this is still recording. It is, okay. If you sort of commit yourself to lofty ideals like human rights and world peace, then you should be aware of the fact that there's a certain level of frustration and anger and resentment and despair.
So my name is Tamara Ben Halim. I find the question of what my job is difficult. My background is in nonprofit and human rights work, usually with a focus on Palestine and the Palestinian question. My focus is dedicated to strengthening the Palestinian voice and trying to help bring momentum to a struggle for Palestinian rights that has taken on a new turn in recent years.
There was a time when I wasn't actually sure I was going to play you this TEDx trail at all, because I was concerned and I felt conflicted that some of the ideas and some of the participants didn't represent my own experience of these particular topics. It was really a difficult time for me, so much so that I was talking to my dad, and I said, "Dad, I've got this talk in Munich on November 10th. And he stopped me immediately and he said, "Well, November 10th, that is the anniversary of Kristallnacht." Kristallnacht was the turning point for Jews in Austria and Germany, where aggression towards them became overtly more violent. And the reason that my father should know that with such immediacy was because he was there. He was born in Vienna in 1923, and he escaped just after Kristallnacht and went to England, and that's why I'm English. His sister Ava also escaped just after Kristallnacht, and she went to then Palestine, later Israel, where she lived her whole life until she died just 4 months ago. So Israel, it's like a second home to me. Half my family lived there. I lived in kibbutz when I was a kid, and I went there throughout my life. And many of my ideas about social justice actually come from Ava and her family. How could I possibly give a platform to some ideas that didn't take these things that I'd learned into account? Now, I know the hypocrisy, I appreciate that, and the implications of thinking about censoring my trail, yet that's how I felt. She meant so much to me that I even took my twins, my 1-year-old twins, to see her just a week before she died so that they could meet for the first and the last time. But what I've come to realize is that this trail has taken me to exactly where I need to go. That place where I feel conflicted and torn. That place that is at the edge of my open-mindedness. Because that's where I stand to learn the most. That's where change can happen. That's where my hidden treasures are. So, earlier when I opened this talk, I asked you, who would you put on this stage? Well, I was asked the same question by TEDx. And I've come to this enormous personal realization that my most interesting person and my presentation is by way of introducing Tamara Ben Halim. Thank you.